New videos every day.
Hi, I'm Radhia Gleis. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist.
And I'm Peter McCarthy. I'm a certified traditional naturopath.
And this is Wake Up America. Well, Peter, nice do.
Thank
Dude.
you. Thank
Notice
you.
Mr. Clean here?
It's my new look.
I know. It looks good. I like it.
Thank you.
Very handsome. Well, lots of things are going on in the media right now about health and healthcare, and what's coming around is flu season.
Yes, it is.
And the big swine flu epidemic is, in all the news, and big scuttlebutt about that. So tell us, Peter, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, we've heard a lot about swine flu and the parallels that are being drawn between today and the 1918 flu epidemic. The problem is that when you look past the surface layer of detail, you really see that there aren't very many parallels at all. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you look at the history of swine flu back in 1918, where did it start? It started in the trenches in France during World War I. And it was transmitted so rapidly because you had an environment where these doughboys, as they were known back then, were living in trenches, a very unsanitary, wet, damp environment with very close quarters. And so it was very easy for that flu virus to spread. Well, they win the war, they go home. How do they go home? They go home on ships that are packed to the gills with returning American doughboys. And sure enough, same thing, close quarters, right? The virus spreads further. Well, now they've got to go back to their posts and be processed before they can be released back into civilian life. Same thing, close quarters, the virus spreads further, and now all of a sudden we have a pandemic. Well, fast forward to 2009. Do we have anything going on like that? Not really. The only thing that even comes close is the environment that helped to spread the flu to begin with, the close quarters of Mexico City. But up here in the United States, it's just not there. You don't have the same kinds of environments that precipitated the spread of the flu back in the early part of the last century. So I think it's only fair to say that when you compare the historical record of the 1918 pandemic to what's going on today, they don't have very much in common. To top it all off, of course, you've got a completely different strain of flu that, interestingly enough, a growing body of scientists say somehow was created artificially. But that brings up the point. What do we do about it, Radhia? You've got some information that can help people with that.
It's interesting because there's a lot of ideas of what you can do naturally. Certainly the obvious is to wash your hands. That's a given. We do have, we do this and we touch our face and, these things. So keep our hands washed. First of all, drink lots of water, stay away from sugars that feeds viruses and bacteria, eat healthy. But one of the things that they're really, really showing, and this is just all over it's actually in mainstream media, God forbid. We're really seeing that the great hope for counteracting the flu of any kind, let alone the epidemic. And by the way, my grandfather died of the 1918 influenza virus. Never got to meet him. I'm not quite that old. But I do have a heartfelt relationship with the 1918 flu virus. But anyway, the most important thing that we're seeing now is a very interesting hormone. Now, people identify this as a vitamin, but it's actually under the category of a hormone, and it's actually a steroid hormone. And guess what it is? You already know.
I sure do.
Vitamin D.
You bet.
Right, vitamin D. Now, the key thing, and what we're really discovering, and there were some research scientists that did a study where they noticed that in hospital, this particular doctor that was doing this study noticed that his ward in particular, all the other wards in the hospital were getting flus, but his ward wasn't. Now, obviously his patients were exposed. They were exposed to other patients, etc., but they weren't. And the one key factor that he had going is that a lot of the individuals that were on his floor, number one, were African American specifically, and we do know that because of the melanin in the skin, African Americans have a less ability to absorb vitamin D through the sun, and many of them in his ward were also the elderly and prisoners.
Huh.
And so what he knew was them being in prison and not getting out into the sun a lot or whatever, he started giving those patients 2,000 IUs of vitamin D every single day. And he noticed that not one of his patients had the flu when there was this basic epidemic, this small epidemic in the entire hospital except for his floor. And he was the only one that was administering 2,000 IUs of vitamin D. So, of course, that was very interesting.
Sure was.
So he continued the study, and that went on, and that was very interesting. But what he found in that study was calcitrol, which is the active vitamin D. That hormone is actually what's called an antimicrobial peptide, or that's what it stimulates the production of, is an antimicrobial peptide or protein. And what this protein does is it actually destroys the cell, and rather rapidly, of the bacteria, viruses, funguses, etc. So this is a very key component. Also, another thing that vitamin D does, which is interesting, is it demasks the genome turning that turns on proteins on and off. So it's not just a vitamin. Most vitamins are either in the antioxidant category or in the cofactor category,
Yep.
where they are allies to our metabolic enzyme system. But vitamin D is very different than all of the other vitamins. And so it plays that important role in turning on proteins and genome patterns. Another important thing that it does is it prevents the immune system from releasing what we call cytokines, okay? Or chemokines. These are our inflammatory response. And one of the things that you were mentioning in hospital, they were doing studies in 1918, and they noticed that particular influenza, what killed the patients was really a secondary infection of pneumonia.
Right.
But what they noticed is that the cytokine release was actually destroying the epithelial cells of the lungs. And the lungs were deteriorating, and that's literally what killed the people from that flu. So the important factor here is that vitamin D, it suppresses cytokine release, okay, which is what's actually the activated inflammation that caused the lungs to be so inflamed that it killed the host, basically. So these are the key factors that they've discovered about vitamin D and why it's so important. And it may be, as we've talked about in our last video, all the government is really trying to get everybody to get their flu vaccinations, and I'll let you cover that again for a second. But more importantly, where do you get your vitamin D and how much? One of the biggest problems is in this country and really around the world, because we, in the last at least 100 years, have come out from the farms and outside and into closed-in buildings most of the time, right? And then, of course, with the whole scare of skin cancer and whatever, when we are out in the sun, we, shade ourselves. We don't go out often enough. We slather ourselves with, our sun tanning lotions that have, the
sunscreen,
sunscreen
the SPF.
in them. Yeah. And so we're really not only do we need vitamin D, but literally the majority of the population is way below the level to a gross degree. I started just naturally in my blood workup. When I do just a basic blood workup for my blood nutrition for my clients, I naturally do what's called a 25-OH vitamin D. And I actually did one on you.
Yes, you did.
Just recently.
And what did we find?
I did that you were
low.
Way low.
That's
even
right.
with that chrome dome of yours, you still really, and obviously,
That's right.
look at this fair skin,
Yep.
right? I'm the same way. And we find that people, especially in the northern regions, the ones that aren't exposed to the sun, especially, above the hemisphere, up in the northern areas, the people like you and I that have more Nordic skin or things like that, we simply we'll fry out there. So we really don't get a lot of vitamin D in general.
Exactly. So what do you do about it?
Well, basically, you take vitamin D because we've noticed, like, for example, they'll try and get vitamin D through our diet. If you ate enough fish, shall we say, to get the adequate amount of vitamin D, you'd have to eat sardines for breakfast, mackerel for lunch, salmon. You'd have to eat all the cold water fishes, cod fish, cod liver oil, et cetera, and you still wouldn't get enough. So getting it in your diet. Also, people say, well, my milk is vitamin D fortified. Well, it's only fortified with about 100 IU. But when you actually are out in the sun, if you were full body out in the sun for 20 minutes, you'd be taking in about 20,000 IUs. 20,000 versus 100 IUs.
There you go.
So this is a rather important factor if we think we're going to get our vitamin D, and no wonder we have this deficiency in it.
That's it.
So obviously the cod liver oils and your omega type, very fatty fish, oily fish is where you get your vitamin D, but you still can't get enough if you're going to consume it. And I know most of you guys out there aren't probably eating a whole bunch of that kind of fish. So what do?
If you eat any fish at all, right?
Yeah, you have to supplement. And the problem is the RDA right now is 400 IU. So this was another factor, too. They noticed why our flus seem to be seasonal. And when are they seasonal?
In the wintertime.
In the wintertime when there isn't enough sun.
That's right.
Those flus seem to go away when there's heavy sunlight.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, exactly. So basically what we do need to do is to really bone up on our vitamin D. And I would say 1,000 to 2,000 IU, which is like up until now, this has been unheard of. But really, we're seeing that as a prudent dose, 1,000 IU. And if you do start to feel symptoms of the flu, you kick that up to 2,000 IU of vitamin D. And some people, and I really, really say this because vitamin D is a water-soluble vitamin. It is a fat-soluble vitamin. So the big scare about vitamin D and all the fat-soluble vitamins is that you can store up and you can get a vitamin D, overdose. Well, it takes a long time to get an overdose. I will say this, that it would be a prudent idea to get your vitamin D the next time you get your blood work done. Ask your doctor to do a 25-OH vitamin D. If you want to know more about that, then visit my website, advancedhealthinstitute.com, and I'll give you some more directions on that and what kind of blood work you should do. It is important to monitor your vitamin D if you think that you're going to take higher levels. Some people actually, I will give 5,000 IU vitamin D for a period of time if they're really low, sort of like you.
There you go.
Okay, we're boning up with him because his vitamin D was quite low. So we're kicking it in for a couple of months, and then we're going to retest and make sure that he's not going over and then titrate that dosage down.
There you go.
You should monitor it and make sure every year, check it out. You ladies, understand that if you don't have good bone density and you're taking calcium, magnesium, the problem isn't that. The problem is vitamin D deficiency. This is why we're seeing so much osteoporosis out there, and we're seeing all kinds of bone problems, especially in women. That calcitriol, that active vitamin D is remember, it's a hormone, and it plays an intricate part in bone density.
it plays an integral part in a lot of factors, not just your immune system, as we've been talking about here primarily, and bone density, but also in your mental state. When you're talking about vitamin D deficiency, it's not just your immune and osteoporosis. It has a very profound effect on your mood. And think about it. Where do you think the root cause of seasonal affective disorder, aka seasonal depression, is?
Exactly.
Vitamin D deficiency.
Yeah.
You've got to get it from somewhere. Now, obviously, as Radhia very aptly pointed out, easiest way to do it is go spend 20 minutes out in the sun every day. Mm-hmm. Do it. Mm-hmm. Just, get a chair, if nothing else, and sit out in the backyard when you come home from work, when the sun is at its brightest, for 20 minutes.
Right.
That's it.
But again, as we pointed out, the problem is in the wintertime, sometimes the sun is inadequate.
Exactly.
Even if you're sitting out in it, if it's a cloudy day or whatever, you're not going to get the kind of UV rays that you need to build up that vitamin D. And that's why vitamin D supplementation during the wintertime is really important, especially if you're up in the northern territories, or if you're in a kind of a place that has, heavy winters, you just can't get it. So that's really what I suggest. And there's lots of research out there that is, really coming out with evidence that says vitamin D may be actually the answer to the flu. Not just this pandemic coming around, not just the swine flu, but the answer to flus, not only flus, but we're also using this in HIV, we're using it in autoimmune disease, we're seeing that vitamin D is one of the key components to all kinds of diseases, cardiovascular disease, inflammatory diseases, diabetes, cancers, etc. So vitamin D is a really, really important, component.
Getting to be the big kahuna in a lot of ways.
That's right. That's right.
And you asked me at the end, I'm assuming we're done. Okay. You asked me at the end for just a moment to touch on the vaccine. Uh-huh. Folks, you're going to be faced with a choice this fall. Okay? And the choice really boils down to this. Do you want to take a vaccine that is completely untested on humans, has a high level of what they call adjuvants, squalene or thimerosal, depending upon which lot you're talking about, and run the risk, mercury, thank you very much, and run the risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome or some other kind of serious illness. And the reason I'm mentioning this is still America, and we still have a choice here. If you don't want to be confronted with the government saying you have to do this, make your voice heard. Call your congressman, call your senator, and tell them, look, we want you to tell the president and to tell the FDA, no mandatory vaccinations. Now, you're going to hear all kinds of noise from the so-called experts, very honestly, who are in the pocket of big pharma, who are going to say, oh, well, don't worry about it. The risk is very low. The risk of swine flu is much higher. Well, I think if you're watching this video, chances are by now you know better than that. And the point being is make an informed choice. Even if you make the choice to get the vaccination, make sure it's an informed choice, not just, well, my doctor said that, I think I should get it. You are empowered as an individual, especially in this country, to make your own decision. And that's the decision for your children and your infants. You have to be very, very careful about making that decision. Exactly. Yeah. So, well, thanks, Peter. Lots of great information. And stay tuned. We're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff coming up. And again, you can visit us. You can visit the Texas Health Freedom. And what's the other website we want to tell them about? Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. We are collaborating as partners with a brand new production company, AHI Productions. If you go to ahiproductions.com, you'll see a little more about the exciting project that we have underway as well. Yeah, later on we're going to ask you guys
to give us some input on that project.
There you
but
go.
That'll come up next. All right. Well, thank you for visiting, and we'll see you next time.
So long, folks. See you next time.
If you liked this video, we have hundreds of more alternative videos ranging from sexual health to psychology to mind control. So if you liked it, go ahead and click on me to enter the Psychetruth channel.